This is Reader's Radar, scanning Indiana's literary journals for outstanding new short stories. In every episode, we talk with one journal's editor about these surprising publications. And you hear a short story recommended by that editor as something special. Reader's Radar is a production of Indiana Public Media and WFIU Public Radio. It's your forecast for great reading ahead. I'm your host and reader, Shane Lauder. Our featured publication today is Sycamore Review, an internationally acclaimed literary journal out of West Lafayette, Indiana, published by Purdue University's College of Liberal Arts and the Department of English. The editorial staff is drawn from Purdue's Master of Fine Arts and Creative Writing program. While Purdue's English department has long enjoyed a stellar reputation for scholarship, it didn't have a literary magazine until 1989. I talked with Anthony Sutton, who was the Sycamore Review's editor during his final year in the MFA program. I find it fascinating that we have about 17 literary journals publishing in Indiana, both in print and online, and 3 of them are internationally renowned, and one of those is Sycamore Review. Tell me a little bit of Sycamore Review's history. I know that it was founded in 1989 in memory of a graduate student at Purdue who had campaigned to have a literary journal, and then she perished in a car accident.
Exactly, yeah. The graduate student, Anne Griffith Lindsay, was part of what would have been the first MFA cohort at Purdue, but unfortunately her untimely death was right before the program started. Before there was Sycamore Review, and there still is today, is a really renowned academic journal called Modern Fiction Studies. And Anne Griffith Lindsay particularly wanted there to be, where Modern Fiction Studies is the big scholarly publication outlet, she had a vision for poetry, fiction, and nonfiction. After she passed away, her family set an endowment where the main rule of it is that there has to be at least one literary publication at Purdue for this money to go toward.
Wow. And so the scholarly fiction journal, is that a Purdue publication?
It is, yeah. It's Modern Fiction Studies, and they're run through the Lit program.
Was that journal and that program sort of the basis for the creative writing MFA?
Not really, actually. The program started when a current faculty member named Marianne Baruch was recruited to start the program. She did her MFA at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. She kind of modeled our program after her experience of the program there. Kind of a 3-year master's degree in fiction, poetry, a mix of creative writing and literature courses. She's been here since the beginning and has kind of cultivated the program.
Purdue is world famous for being an engineering, math, and science university. Why was it considered important for it to have this strong of a literary presence?
It's kind of interesting, actually. You know, even though the image that Purdue puts out and that people have is a very kind of STEM-oriented, and this university genuinely does have a really phenomenal history with engineering, the university still started out as a land-grant university, so there's still kind of a spirit of comprehensive excellence throughout the university. For English in particular, there's also a program in the English department in rhetoric and composition that for a long time was number 1 in its field. We also have the famous writing lab and the Purdue Owl that are also kind of internationally known. More towards the journal itself, when graduate students finally got the magazine running, a lot of the early editors were really smart about specifically soliciting really prominent authors that they liked, and so that kind of gave early issues a really strong reputation. For instance, there's a poet named Derek Walcott who appears in one of our first issues, and we published a chapter of a book-length poem called Omeros, which later led him to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. In the early days, there was just a lot of effort to cultivate the magazines and the writing center that are kind of paying off now.
Besides new short fiction, Sycamore Review publishes poetry, essays, interviews, and book reviews. It appears in print and online, where it provides an online forum for lively literary discussion. This week on The Radar, we hear To Scream Like Goats by Michelle Donahue, published in the December 2016 edition of the Sycamore Review. Anthony, why did you want to put this story on the radar?
When the fiction editors first were telling me about it, they said, this might be the craziest story Sycamore Review has ever put out.
In a moment, we'll hear To Scream Like Goats by Michelle Donahue. IndianaPublicMedia.org is your online station for award-winning news stories and timeless music, and for stories on the dazzling creativity everywhere in the Hoosier State. Look over to your right on our webpage for links to archived stories about publishing, creativity, and interviews with authors of every genre. Hear poetry from Indiana on The Poet's Weave at IndianaPublicMedia.org. Download and enjoy. And now to Scream Like Goats by Michelle Donahue, published in the December 2016 edition of the Sycamore Review. It is strange to be a woman, to be tangible, a body, to be touched, to be siphoned, treated, touched, plastic, I'll start again. Goats eat clocks. They are our timekeepers, more precise than the sun, more intimate and tangible than clocks themselves. From goat bellies we measured ticking. From their behavior and movement we knew the time. They had eaten all the clocks in the village. Each one savored and then nestled in their bellies, ticking to eternity. And so when the goats left us, when the ocean turned cold and the tide came in, and the goats ascended to our rooftops, we lost normal time. We lost our goats. I think this is the beginning. The ocean didn't turn cold all at once, but in memory it feels that way. One day, my daughter playing in the curl of foam on the shore, her toes naked as her laughter, her skin brown and browning in the sun. One day, the tide rising, the ocean touching our house, thin inches of cold water surrounding us. My daughter bent her hand to the water, that tempting salt slick. Her palm cupped a cloudy shard. She held it as it melted. This was the first time we'd seen ice, the first witness of melting. She inhaled in a way so sharp that her whole body jerked. This vision that all that is solid can dissolve, that even what we touch can disappear before us. We'll watch it. We'll have to. And what of the goats? It was this ice that they feared. They have concave hooves. Only the edges ever know the ground. The rest, a cave and an echo into their body. If the goats remained in this water, their blood would turn to ice. They would turn cold-hearted. Of course, all the goats took to the rooftops, where it was dry, where they would remain goats. But I wonder, is it good to remain, to be a remnant? My daughter looked to our goat on the roof. His name was Lupe. She loved him. He had become hers after her father died. She said, "Please come down, Lupe. I need you." Her hand was still raised, palm still cupped, but empty of ice. She looked at it as if she had suddenly understood something terrible. Oh, young children and their wisdom. She said, "If you don't come down, the clocks will stop. I will make them." From above I heard a ticking from the goat's belly clock. It felt as if all was counting down. "Why will you make the clock stop?" I asked my daughter. But she wouldn't speak to me. "I'm sorry," she said to Lupe. The clock ticked, marked passing seconds. My daughter grew obsessed with her attempt to persuade Lupe to descend. Every day at some unknown time, for time was fluid and unmarked without the goats, she would leave the house to talk to him. Before she left, she would wrap her feet in thick cloth, encase them in her thin shoes, where before in the warmth they had been enough, and grab her metal pail. She walked toward the ocean, although this whole land felt like ocean now. Its water covered all of our ground. A thin but cold flood seeps everywhere. She would walk to where the coast once was, and sift through the water to find small pebbles. Once she'd collected her pebbles, she would return to our house. She would stand on a tree stump just elevated from the water and throw her pebbles at Lupe. I think she did this as a means to catch his attention, even though the action to me seemed violent, like a threat. But she wouldn't threaten Lupe. That goat was her father. Revision. He was like her father. Of course, that's what I meant. Sometimes I forget. As she propelled her pebbles to the rooftop, she would speak to Lupe. She'd stopped speaking to me, so this was the only time I heard her voice. I listened out the window, one hand on my stomach, the other on the windowsill. "Lupe, come down," she said. "Lupe, I love you. I want to hug you." Pebble throw, tink, tink, on the roof. "But I'm afraid to touch you." Afraid of what? "What is she doing?" my brother asked. He lived next to us and had no children of his own. "I don't know," I said. "She won't speak to me, won't listen." I had asked her quietly. I'd yelled for her to come indoors. My voice fell to the wind. My daughter either couldn't or wouldn't hear it. "I'm worried," he said. I nodded. He asked, "Do you want me to try?" Again, I nodded. His body looked too big, burly, like an island out there in the water. He approached my daughter, spoke softly. She screamed. From the house I heard it. I could always hear her voice. "Get away," she said. "Don't touch me." He said, "Your feet are blue." He looked volcanic, angry, an igneous, black-crisped man. He grabbed her, his arm around her waist. He swung her over his shoulder, and she kicked. She wailed as she had only done once before. Who was this person? She seemed someone else entirely. No one I had known in my womb. I put my hand to my belly. Soon I would have to tell her of that second person inside me, the last remnant of her father. Though my daughter kicked and screamed, he held her tightly. For a moment the remembrance of that other heartbeat in me had quieted my anger. But as my brother came through the door, as he manhandled my daughter, it returned. Oh, what an appropriate word. Manhandle. It should be the men that handle crises, but it's the women who are left. It's the men who think they can handle us, can withstand our touch, but it is us who remain, who always outlive them. I hit my brother with the base of my palm. I hit him on his chest. I felt his collarbone. "Let go of her," I said. I wanted his help, not this. My daughter was young, but a person, full-fledged and deserving to be listened to, even if she wouldn't listen to me. "Have you seen her toes?" he said. "They're blue. She'll lose them." In all of her time outside, the cloth had fallen from her feet. Her toes were exposed. My daughter fled to the corner of the room and sat. She held her cold toes in her less cold hands. "Lose them?" I said. "Frost bite," he said. "I've heard stories about people who have already lost something, a toe, a finger, from the cold." We'd never had to worry about this before. We knew all there was to know about our landscape, the sand and shore, urchins and starfish, but nothing about this cold. From the corner my daughter said, "It's me who causes losing." She pointed to her uncle. A trail of blood began from his nostril. At first slim and spindly, then thicker. He pressed his finger to it, tried to stem its flow, but it wouldn't stop. On the rooftop, the clock ticked. It seemed much fainter, much slower than before. I ached. I listened to my daughter plead with Lupe. I had found her thick plastic sheeting washed from the ocean and woven her socks from wool so that her feet would be less cold. And I indulged her, allowed her to spend hours outside, her feet on the stump, her voice with the goat. It was only these moments I heard her, when I could imagine she hadn't stopped speaking to me. "Lupe," my daughter said, "I miss my mother, but I can't talk to her." I pressed my palm to the cool window glass. I thought she hated me, thought she blamed me for the loss of her father. "I'm afraid," she said. "Ever since the tide made you leave, I'm different." The tink-tink of small ocean pebbles, the tick-tick of the clock. "I can't talk to her, but I want to show her." She wouldn't look at me, but she pointed to the ocean. I took that as a message. She jumped from her stump and took off running. I followed, my body tense and jittery. My heart couldn't bear to hope, but in its fast heartbeat, so fierce I felt it in my fingers, I did hope. My daughter didn't hate me. Maybe I could regain her. We ran to the tide pools. I kept my distance. I remembered what she said to her uncle, "Do not touch." She bent over the largest pool, still and iridescent, like a liquid mirror. She pointed to a starfish, the orange of a dying fire. Her hand hovered for a long time. She reached out and touched it from center to the tip of one limb. "I'm sorry," she said. She turned her back to me and ran back to her stump, her immovable goat. Before she ran off, I caught a glimpse of her face. Her red eyes and tear-streaked cheeks offered me no insight into her apology. Sorry for what? I was sorry I was here. Sorry my daughter wouldn't talk to me. Sorry I convinced her father to take the boat out with me, even when he said it wasn't safe. But we needed fish, needed protein. I pleaded with him to go out with me, even though there was a storm, even though I knew he wasn't as strong a swimmer. Sorry when the boat tipped, when the ocean curled and took his body. Sorry I can only think of him as her father, not my husband, because that way there's distance. Since the tide came in, the fish washed to our house, right up to the door. On my way back to the house, I grabbed one, already half dead, already gasping, a silvery body and 2 dead, beady eyes. My brother returned with a bandage on his nose. I said, "Your nose?" He said, "She's still out there," and pointed to my daughter, who, yes, was always out there with Lupe, with the cold water. "She showed me a starfish," I said. "A starfish?" She stroked it. It was a message. He said, "There's no easy way to say this." I said, I don't understand what she's saying." He said, "I'm dying." He peeled back the bandage from his nose. Beneath was a pitted wound, red and festering. Beneath was a missing piece of his nose. The doctor said it was face cancer. I didn't know that existed. So many new terrors. Frostbite, face cancer, a silent daughter, a missing husband. I mean father. My brother told me not to worry, said the condition wasn't genetic. The doctor said it was caused by environmental factors. But worry isn't something I control, not something I can quiet. Worry is like loss, a beast you can try to run from, but sooner or later you'll trip. Its endurance will outlast you. You'll be forced to endure. And I'm this word. I am suffer. I am remaining in existence. I laughed at my brother. I said, "Of course I won't worry. Genetic or environmental, what does that matter? We've always lived here. In the face of his death, why would I worry about my own?" The nights were lonely, lonelier than the days, because then I had my daughter's voice. Even that had grown dark. "We're running out of time," she kept saying. "Your clock will stop. Please come down." The indent her father left in our bed still remained. This is what we leave behind. Not a presence, but the indication of one. We remind with empty space. He left a hole in the universe. I listened to the goat's belly ticking, ever so faintly audible, through the rooftop. The ticking had never seemed so slow. Time slowed on our small fishing boat as it overturned. The world seemed clear. As I plummeted beneath the water, I easily found the direction of the surface. I swam up, my head broke free from the water, and I breathed. But the water was tumultuous black, and his body was nowhere. Revision. I thought I saw him in the distance. Beneath me, I thought I'd heard his voice. He left a hole and a bulge in my belly. And though I wanted nothing more than to meet this child and hold on to him through this piece, this person, I was scared. When the tide came in, it brought with it something sinister. The goats felt it. The ice and this something else. My daughter felt it. She must have, because she was all mysteries, all gloom and fear. The unborn child was like ice, like us all, ready to melt. I woke to my daughter's voice. "The clock is your heart, and when it stops," the sound of water, lapping waves. "Do we all stop? Tick." I rose from my bed and, as always, stared at the slight indent made not from my body, but the memory of his. Tick. Within me, I thought the baby kicked. Tick. Impossible, it was too early. I shrouded myself with my warmest robe and went to the window. When my face appeared in the window, my daughter said, "Lupe, come down. Let's look at the starfish together." She ran off, and I knew well enough that I was meant to follow. I wrapped my feet in wool and plastic and ran after her. The water felt deeper, a little colder. More refuse floated in it, neon plastic of all types. It seemed so celebratory, like a dream you'd awake from with a smile. And yet It tangled around my feet. A piece cut my ankle, so that for a moment I left a red trail in my wake. I briefly turned back to see it, the thin stream of blood, the house in the backdrop, until I continued in pursuit of my daughter. She stopped again at the coves. The same cove, the same ragged eclipse, a damaged eye. Ellipse, oblong, an ellipsis, a pause. Such strange trailing off. What did I mean? I meant the cove. My daughter bending forward. The same cove with the starfish she stroked. My message I couldn't decode. The same cove where my daughter and her father and I had once stood. Her father loved starfish. As a child, he had observed them closely, had discovered all their biological secrets. He had taught my daughter and me all he had known. My daughter pointed. I could tell by that exact orange that it was the same starfish, but so different. One arm wholly missing, the rest a strange gelatinous mess, the central body pure liquid, the arms curled and disastrous. Dead, I said. Dissolved. My daughter nodded. You think you did this, I said. I remembered her apology. She shrugged, not in a nonchalant, I don't know, maybe way, but a sort of shrug that seemed emphatic. Yes, I did this, can't you see? That's ridiculous, I said. I ached for her. Since the tide came in, since she held that ice and it melted, she thought it was her. She was the fuel for this dissolving. I thought of the evidence she must have mounted. The ice, her uncle, his nose left gaping, this starfish. What else might there be? What other holes might be in her heart? Her father? That was my fault more than anyone's. And the ocean. But what a mistake to blame nature. I blame myself. But back to my daughter. It isn't you. It's something else, I said. An explanation that even to me seemed inadequate. When the tide came in, everything seemed changed. Or perhaps it was even before that, when her father left us. She said nothing. She was still afraid she would harm me. My heart broke. It swelled. I want you to feel something, I said. I patted my belly. Your sibling lives inside there for now. I know we'll love her or him very much. A baby? She said, then clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide as an ellipsis. Ellipse, perhaps more of a circle. An orange. Yes, I said. Your father would never leave us without leaving a piece of himself behind. She remained with her hand over her mouth. You're not causing this, I said. I'll prove it. And before she could move, I hugged her. She screamed, a sort of noise I won't forget. The same sort of noise I thought I heard from her father when I lost his body. A voice from a dream. You won't hurt me, I said, loudly enough to deafen her scream, her voice that turned silent. I won't let you. I was wrong. It is a strange thing to be woman, a strange thing to be tangible, a thing to be touched, treated, plastic, I'll start again. It is a strange thing to be a mother of a daughter who thinks she is destroying you, of an unborn child you love as much as you loved your husband, your daughter's father, the ocean, the feel of ice between toes, the fear of a falling nose. Your brother returns. My brother. Returned. I'm dying, he said again. You knew. I knew. Oh, how hard-hearted, but you see, I'm already so full of holes. I see a husband-sized hole, a father, a starfish, a nose. I hugged him, and yes, I was afraid of this contact, this melting. Don't go, I said, and he was already at the door. I cannot talk of grief, but I can speak of starfish. I can tell you everything her father taught me. Starfish, the newly named sea star, a name more whimsical, a creature of the sky. Advantage, accuracy. Starfish aren't fish, but echinoderms, like sand dollars, which aren't money, only discs, like circles, an eclipse, ellipse, an eye, an orange. But sea stars. What could melt a sea star? These creatures regenerate full limbs. Chop one arm off and another grows. Some even can regrow their bodies, the central disc. Imagine if we could regrow parts of ourselves. I could lend you a finger, a toe, a nose. Here, take it. I'll regrow. What could kill a creature that can regenerate whole limbs? Sea stars house their organs in their arms. 5 duplicates, sometimes more. Some sea stars have 10 legs, some more. Oh, what incredible redundancy. Some sea stars don't even need a whole limb to survive. With less than 1/5 of their former selves, they regrow, as if severing limbs is a favor, a method of regeneration, a birth, to create clones of the original, to increase the likelihood of persistence. Is this why he loved sea stars so much? Their ability to escape their body, to regrow, and continue to persist? After I hugged my daughter, each night she slept in my bed. What bliss! She figured if we had already touched, then the damage, if any, had been done. We might as well touch. She slept in her father's indent. My belly had grown larger. Still so many days, months, until I could meet this other part of him. My brother came to the house and wept. His nose had vanished. Beneath the bandages was a hole. I didn't want to wince, but I did. Dark, the gaping absence of his nose. My daughter screamed and rushed outside to the cold. She couldn't stand that hole. "Can you smell?" I asked. He shook his head, no. "I could hardly taste, too." "I'll make dinner," I said. "I'll spice the fish. I'll make you taste." A fish gasped not far from our door, not far from my daughter. I grabbed the fish with my hands and took it to the kitchen. He was already dead, or mostly, but for certainty I slammed the base of my knife to his skull. I took this this knife, and then darkness, a fuzz. I can't remember. I mean a member. I mean a dead fish. Dead, yes. I split the dead fish with my knife. Neon-colored plastic emerged as innards. Electric pink, slick yellow, knots and helixes. This wasn't the first time I'd found plastic in fish, but it was the most colorful, the most shocking. I scooped out the plastic, scooped it clean, rubbed turmeric and garlic, paprika and thyme on the skin, roasted it over fire. Above, tick, tick, slow. A trick of time, of a goat's belly, a goat who chose escape over endurance. I don't blame him. My brother could taste this fish. "Delicious," he said. And yes, it was, but there was a taste of something metallic on my tongue, and my daughter would not come in the house, could no longer be with my brother. The clocks stopped, and with it my mind, time. Goat hooves clap on the roof. Lupe opens his mouth and screams a plea, or my daughter's voice. It's night. I wake to screams. I wake in the dark alone with only an indent. No, my daughter, mouth open, screaming. In the mirror, my blank face. Nothing. But now the sun. Now that word means nothing to me. Now, there's nowhere to be. My belly, a kick. It cannot be a kick. I do not feel myself. I feel like myself. I climb into the hole of my brother's nose. He's left already. It's dark inside. There's blood on the bed, a trail from my body. My daughter screaming, Lupe screaming, an indent on the bed. The sea star left a star-shaped indent in the stand, in the eclipse of the cove. An ellipsis. I can talk of Voss, but can't speak of goats. They swim incredibly, scale whole mountainsides. Climb. The loss of a limb. Sever one, the sea star regrows the body whole. We can't regrow a nose, only a hole. Goats are clocks. Goats scream like us. My brother was once in the military. He said military doctors once use goats as practice. Shoot them, then treat the wound, stem the blood. There's blood on the bed. Learn how to endure the screaming. They scream like us, except for the eyes. Goat eyes are dead. A scream with no expression. A blank face. Goats are human, aren't they? They scream like us, but their eyes are blank. They show nothing, no glimpse of emotion. Lupe is our clock. My daughter's father, a replacement, a friend. There is no ticking on the roof. Clocks stop, and Lupe stamps on the roof and screams. Blank, dead eyes. There are no clocks. I practice screaming like a goat. No emotion. All noise, blank, dead eyes. Practice until the stamping on the roof stops. That was the short story To Scream Like Goats by Michelle Donahue, published in the December 2016 edition of the Sycamore Review. Michelle Donahue is a PhD candidate in fiction at the University of Utah. She has an MFA in Creative Writing and Environment from Iowa State and a BS in Environmental Biology from Beloit College. You've been listening to Reader's Radar, a presentation of WFIU Public Radio and Indiana Public Media, recorded at the studios of WFIU Public Radio on the campus of Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. Our producer is Shane Lauder. Production director is Mark Chilla. Digital director is Eoban Binder. Executive producer is John Bailey. Music for this program is shared under Creative Commons license by the artists Lobo Loco and Maidan at freemusicarchive.org. Episodes are posted at our website, indianapublicmedia.org/readersradar, with links to more literary audio from WFIU Public Radio. I'm your host and reader, Shane Lauder. Keep listening, keep reading, keep an ear on the radar.